Next iteration of the Augason Farms food testing stuff. One of my favorite items from them is the cheese blend powder. Now it's basically kind of a yellow-orange cheddar cheese powder, very similar to the stuff that's going to come in little packets with macaroni and cheese. And basically what it is. It's a processed cheese product. And is this optimum cuisine? No, of course not. This is long-term survival food. But in the dishes that I'm preparing right here, what I'm doing is we're supplementing, okay? And earlier today, I got a good deal on this heavy whipping cream because it was about expired. Now, if the containers stay sealed, you'll have sour cream, in another day or two. Or if it's shaken around a little bit, it turns to butter. But because of that lack of consistency, stores will get rid of that stuff cheap, often just give it to food banks or whatever. So when we're making macaroni and cheese, remember how the ingredients go. Usually you've got the little packet of cheese powder, and then you've got the butter, and then you've got milk. Okay, and that's usually the way it's going to work, is you get your cheese powder, your butter, and your milk. Now, one of the secrets of making macaroni and cheese better is use the heavy whipping cream. So what we're going to do is we're going to be making something very similar to the cheese that would be in macaroni and cheese, but we're going to take it another step. We're going to use this little mini blender to turn it into a processed cheese spread, which is somewhere between buttery cheese that we would use on popcorn and Velveeta type stuff. To get that Velveeta texture, though, that's the secret that's kind of proprietary to that company that has to do with storage temperatures and aging. And as we know from back in the 70s and 80s, they would talk about the government cheese, processed cheese. The reason that stuff was set up that way was long storage life, relatively long storage life, and it could kind of sort of work when frozen. The stuff we're going to be making is a little more buttery. So using this little TV infomercial blender type thing, I figured out I can use a couple of these little half pints of heavy whipping cream and about a half of one of these little mini cups of the cheese powder. Now, there's other things you can do to flavor this. You can put oregano in there, you can put seasoning salt, wasabi, olive oil, stuff like that. Because the cheese powder is pretty salty, we're going to go pretty light on the salt, if any at all. In fact, I think on this one, I'm going to skip that salt altogether. We're going to use a little bit of oregano and maybe some olive oil. All right, so pouring both of these into the little blender cup, you'll notice there's still some chunky stuff left in there. Now that's just stuff that would either become cream cheese or butter, depending on what you want. As long as there's no mold in here, we want that stuff in our mix. So I'm going to spoon that out. I've got to use both hands to do it, so I'll set down the camera. We want all that in the mix, because as this stuff started to turn, it's separated. We talked about long-term survival situations in rural areas. Assume that you would probably purchase or acquire a dairy cow for the retreat. Probably more than one. So we're going to consider dairy to be relatively available either by purchasing or owning, getting a dairy cow or bartering for that. We consider dairy to probably be available. The thing about processed dairy stuff is processing plants may not be running, transport may not be running, and the stuff may be separating on its own because you're talking raw milk, and raw milk will start separating on its own fairly quickly. So again, you may choose to pasteurize, personal choice. This stuff was previously pasteurized. I'm not going 100% organic here. So with that stuff in there, it quickly sinks. I am kind of going with about 25% by volume on the mix. Now, whatever blender you're using, there's going to be something in the next step that you're going to have to understand about the way these things work is the stuff is going to get hard. And we're going to reach a two-handed part here. But this stuff is going to get kind of hard, but this is what you're going to be looking for, whether you're using an upside-down type blender, like one of these little silver bullet things or whatever they call it, or a conventional blender. I gave that a few shakes to distribute the powder. Notice that it started to float right away when I turned this thing upside down. Now, the way this thing works, it's a pressure. Now, that's when it started, and you can kind of see that's still liquid in there. I want you to listen to the video very carefully, because when that pitch changes, it's because this stuff is hardened to about the consistency of cake frosting. That's as far as we're going to go. We could keep going, but that's where you want to use like a mixer, like a dough mixer type of thing, to go beyond that. So what's going to happen with this is you'll get a little bit of butter in there, but we're basically looking for it to be slightly hardened, not quite totally turned butter stage. And we'll know when it happens, because the sound coming out of the mixer will change. Okay, so you probably caught that. It went up in RPM. That's because the stuff started to harden and solidify, and it threw the material away from the blades. Now, because this is an upside down type thing, the liquid keeps coming down. So once that liquid is hardened enough that it's throwing it away from the blades by centrifugal force, you get that different sound. You know you're done. You're ready to go. Okay, so opening it, we'll see that we've got this. Centrifugal force threw it away from the blades. Notice the blades are relatively clean. I didn't do that. That's just the way it comes out. It's a little bit of a hassle to clean this stuff, but you can get that out with a spoon, depending on how valuable it is to you. And then this stuff that we're going to put on our natural noodles, you can see that it's pretty solid. So it's not going to come out on its own. But the other thing we can do is we could refrigerate this, possibly even freeze it, but I prefer to let it stabilize in a cool refrigerator temperature before freezing it, and then it becomes much more cheese-like. If you keep mixing it, it's going to become much more butter-like, and it's a very good bread spread when you're doing the the baking mix out of the Augason Farms type stuff. But it's not quite going to be a meltable cheese. It doesn't quite go full cheese. But that's one of the better recipes that I've come up with on the Augason Farm cheese blend powder. And of course you can enhance it. The olive oil, the wasabi stuff. I wasn't going to put it in the mixer because I'm just going to put it in the wok right now when I make this kind of a deluxe macaroni and cheese type stuff, but with spinach noodles. So if you have any questions about recipes, any recommendations on the cheese powder, hey, put them in the comments below. I'd love to see them. I've got tons of this stuff. Because my cans became partially compromised in bad storage conditions that were not my decision, we're going to be experimenting with this stuff a lot in the coming year.